Okay. Hello again. So we're going to do this in more depth now. Some of the things that I spoke about. I actually haven't included much rhythm stuff here. It's more about scales and the notes and things like that. So if you are struggling with rhythm, get a drummer to teach you. And there are simple ways of just learning to count out certain values so that when you look at a piece of music, sort of build again on what Gordon was saying earlier, like when you look at a piece of piping music, one of the first things you do, obviously you see all the notes, but you look at it as a monotone rhythm, as in ignore all the actual pitches and just see if you can count 1, 2, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 or whatever, and just get a rhythmic feel for that and apply the notes to that. Okay? The note values are quite easy. You can just learn how to count them out. Then it becomes literally just this is where this goes, this is where that goes. When you look at a piece of music, piece of piping music, you can just check out the rhythm. So I'm like, no, don't worry, we just started. Yeah, so that's one thing, but I haven't done much of that here. Music theory for pipers. There we go. Put it down, get back on. Okay.
That's right. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, so again, I'm going to try and give you an overview of like a lot of stuff. It's okay if not all of it sinks in now. You can sleep on it, and or definitely go and do some more reading in your own time on this. There's plenty of great resources on the internet and plenty of bad ones as well. So if you want guidance on that, you can just email me as well. But a nice resource for, it's not really piping specific related, but there's a website called musictheory.net. Easy one to remember, musictheory.net. And there's like short little lessons which you can sort of go through the slides and just learn a bit about general music theory, and you'll see all of the topics there. Some of it is not really applicable to piping. We look at like certain things, but you can go learn the basics of rhythms, notes again. Obviously it relates all to the piano, the keyboard, but again, if we want to understand our own instrument a lot better, it's good to know what's going on the piano as well, just in a basic format. So, topics for today, we're going to look at diatonic scales, 7-noted scales. We're going to go through the intervals again. I'm going to talk about these things called tendency tones, which is a note wanting to move from where it is to another one, and release some tension. Pentatonic scales, which are 5-note scales. Okay, there. Chords and what arpeggios are, and then the pipe pitches and harmonics. So again, I've pretty much covered most of the stuff except for the tendency tones in the opening session, but we're just going to go a little bit more in depth, and I will play some of the stuff for you. So we'll start off with, there we go, diatonic and pentatonic scales. Now, really, like I said, a diatonic scale just has 7 notes in it before we get to the octave. A pentatonic scale has 5 notes, hence the word prefix pent, right? The other name for diatonic scales that you might hear sometimes is a heptatonic, hepta meaning 7, but it's not so common. Not so commonly used. All right, so the diatonic scale is formed using a specific tonal pattern. And remember, I was saying the basics of moving from one note to another is using what's called a step of a tone or a semitone, right? And a tone, if you look at a keyboard, is moving 2 keys across. Most of the time, it's from between 2 keys of the same color. Most of the time, but essentially, if you just move 2 keys across left or right, you get a tone, and then if you move just 2 keys that are right next to each other, is a semitone. And so the term diatonic means that the scale is constructed using, in some sort of sequence, 5 whole tone steps and 2 semitone steps. And again, where those are placed informs the sound of the scale. Usually, the semitones are not next to each other. There's a gap of 2 or 3 tones before we hear a semitone. Okay, so we are in what's called the Mixolydian mode, which is neither the major scale nor the minor scale. It's actually a different arrangement of the tonal pattern. Okay, and yeah, okay, so I'll just jump back to that slide in a second. If we look at the major scale, this is the easiest one you can find on the piano. If you play the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that is the C major scale, and it should sound very familiar to you. The pipes are set in a scale or a mode that is very similar to that. There's just one key difference, which is to do with the last note. But if we look at this tonal pattern, it goes tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So the distance between C and D is a whole step. The distance between D and E is another whole step. Between E and F is a semitone. Between F and G is a whole tone. G and A, another whole tone. A and G, a third whole tone. And then B and C, a semitone. Okay? And that order is one way that you can run through this pattern, this diatonic pattern, to get a certain scale. Just to outline the modes very quickly, if I run through this set of notes that starts on D natural and run a whole octave to the next D natural that I come across, that you can imagine is starting on this tone here, okay? So as we run through the modes, so the major scale is the Ionian mode. What's called the Dorian mode is starting here. The Phrygian mode is starting here. The Lydian mode is starting here. The Mixolydian here. And sorry, the Aeolian mode. So I have to use all of it. Yes. Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. Okay, so if I run through this pattern and start on the second tone and go tone, semitone, tone, 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 that's said to be a different mode of the same scale. And it just shifts all those positions of where the semitones are. It makes it sound a little bit different. Now, the reason why I'm showing you C major is because it's the starting point, right? It's a really good place to kind of know where we're at. So we can relate things. And I'm going to show you exactly how the Mixolydian mode, our scale, relates to this, which actually starts over here on the 5th note, okay, of any major scale. Now again, I'm trying to condense quite a large topic here, but we are in what's called the Mixolydian mode, which starts here and kind of Pac-Man style will actually end there. So we go there and we would continue, if I continue that, we go tone, tone, semitone, tone. Okay, so the Mixolydian mode would end there. Okay, and when we compare a scale based on the same notes, the major scale and the Mixolydian mode, it just means the 7th note of our scale is a little bit lower in pitch than in a major scale. And for good reason. It actually sounds nicer in melody. Okay, there's less discordant sounds, and it actually helps for smoother melodies. Okay. If you know what the minor scale is, the minor scale is otherwise known as the Aeolian mode. Now these were all sort of theorized by the ancient Greeks, so they've been around for a very long time, and these fancy names, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian, were all, as far as I know, like ancient provinces in Greece or areas. Okay, so they just said, yeah, we're going to own this now. And so the Ionian mode is what we know today is the major scale, and the Aeolian mode is a minor scale, and we have a slightly different starting point here the Mixolydian mode. All right. So yes, for each pattern that we get, we can start off on each one of the keys on the keyboard. Again, it's just more of a pattern of steps. We're going a tone here, another tone here, a semitone here. And we can move that anywhere we want on the keyboard. We're stuck in one place though. Okay, we're stuck in one place. Well, that, as I said earlier, we have 7 different notes in our scale. It's not entirely true. We can play some naturals and some slightly different notes, and those are moving outside of the Mixolydian mode. Interestingly, we can actually play, if you can play a C natural and an F natural, that would be playing a pure minor scale in the Aeolian mode. Do you have a question there?
Yeah.
Yes.
With something like the piano staying at 440 and the tendency of pipe bands to keep rising in pitch, would we shift on that scale at all?
In terms of naming the notes, no. But in terms of the relative pitching, yes. As I was saying, and we'll come to this a bit later again, you know, we read the note of A natural, right? We read this as, right, as our first note. But the note we actually are closer in terms of sounding is a B flat. A B flat, which is a semitone, half a step above A natural. But we're also, in terms of the actual tuning on the piano, A is at 440, where B flat sits, we're not quite there either. We're somewhere weirdly wedged in between. So you either have to, generally it's easier to tune flatter and then to B flat. Again, this is complicated. It took me a while to get my head around it. So I say we're somewhere between A and B flat, but the B flat that we're sounding is actually somewhere here. So we're actually sharp of B flat. And that's when you buy it, if you hear a B flat pipe chanter, which I do have here, maybe I'll demonstrate it later. It sounds really flat, like you have to tune your drones. Actually, you need to get extenders, because if you try and get your drones to the low A, they want to pop off. So we read A, we play an actual closer to a B flat, but in terms of the standardized tuning of that, we're a little sharp of that. And that's why B flat chanter is very flat, okay, according to our ears. Yeah, it's a bit of a problem that we just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. Okay. So, okay. Oh, never mind. It's just a bit slow. Okay, so we're in the A Mixolydian mode, which means we're taking a different tonal pattern to the major scale, and we're starting on A. So we start on A, which in a long roundabout way is we actually use a key signature from a different major scale. We use the notes from D major, which are C sharp and F sharp. So as we don't read this, because the purpose of the key signature is to state to the reader that we're playing, well, which notes are either flattened or sharpened in our scale. So we don't play A, B, C natural, we actually play C sharp and an F sharp, right? And if we take the tonal pattern of a Mixolydian mode, this is exactly why, because we actually need to start off going tone, tone. Between B and C, it's a semitone. With C sharp, which is a semitone higher, gives us a whole step. Okay. I'm going to talk to you also about, I'll give you a really cool program called MuseScore, where you can download for free and you can play around. If you don't actually have a keyboard at home, you can write notes on that and check it out on the keyboard, because it really helps to be able to see all of these things. Okay, it can be a little bit difficult to envision or hear these things looking straight at notation. But that's what we have here. If we were playing, for example, if we could play a full major scale on the pipe, we would also have a G sharp Okay, and that would make the pattern of tones and semitones fall in line with the major scale. You can actually play a G sharp on the pipes. If you play an open G bass note and you play C at the same time, it doesn't sound very good, but it kind of gets to that pitch. You can play a G sharp. If you just do that, we're playing a G natural, which is a little bit lower. Okay. So, like I said, 5 whole tone and 2 semitones, it's the tonal pattern. And because in a roundabout way, we're actually essentially playing in the scale of D major, a certain different major scale, but we're not using the note of D as the first note. We've moved our starting point to A. That's what gives us our mixolydian mode in a roundabout way. Okay. But if you ever have to play alongside other instruments and they have a bit of training, you can say to them, okay, I'm actually in mixolydian mode and I'm in B flat mixolydian. Don't say A, because if they're playing A and you're playing, oh, that sounds so good. You're playing B flat, that would be much more accurate. Okay. Or you could say, I'm playing in the key of round E flat major. Okay. But if they know B flat mixolydian or A mixolydian, if you can tune your pipes there, then it's all fine. As you can see, this is what Franz brought up now, and this whole thing about modes, kind of why there is a barrier between us and playing the piano just out of the bag, or guitar. You both need to know what's going on, and there might be some sort of relative tuning, guitar goes a bit sharper or whatever, or flatter to a different key, or uses a kappa and all of these things. Things like the whistle and the fiddle, because they're kind of pitched at the same place, and the fiddle or the violin isn't governed by frets, then it's just up to the player to match the pitch of the pipes. So that's why we see those instruments more commonly used. Guitar as well, it's easy enough. Piano needs to be set. We don't retune piano on a weekly basis. It does not like that. It's the opposite to pipes in that regard. Okay. If any of this doesn't make sense, I actually noticed there's a piano downstairs. So a little bit later, we can actually just stand around the piano and I'll play the notes, and then we'll get someone on the chart to play along. If you just map those out, then you've got a better understanding. So we'll go and have a hands-on session a bit later. Okay, so the minor scale is just A to A on the piano. If you play A natural, only the natural notes, only the white keys from A to A, you're playing in a minor scale. And, just playing between those two starts to initiate your ears to those, and then you can hear the pipe mixolydian. Mixolydian mode is kind of more like a major scale with one note borrowed from a minor scale, essentially. All right, so that's just an overview of all of that. Then the modes can be a bit tricky to understand, and I'd rather cover a wider array of topics, and you can go and just research deeper into those things. And I'm always available for questions. So this is a lot more relevant and easier to understand. Pentatonic scales have 5 notes, and I've said they're 2 omitted from a diatonic. So it's basically taking a scale that has 7 notes and just leaving 2 out. And what that does is it creates a bigger gap between 2 pairs of notes. Okay? So it's not a different scale necessarily, it's an abbreviated form, sort of. So we have 3 main pentatonic scales that we can actually play on the pipes very easily. The A major pentatonic. Okay, so A, B, C, E, F, and then higher again, right? So those are the 5 notes, A, B, C, E, and F. And again, I've got some examples of tunes that are in this pentatonic scale. Sometimes the notes D or high G or low G are included. That's obviously not purely part of it, but it makes the music become full of characters. Like, oh, that's an interesting note, kind of stands out a little bit. Okay. So that's A major pentatonic. If we lower each of those notes one step down on our scale, we get the G major pentatonic. G, A, B, D, E, G. So I can include, I'm only playing within an octave, but obviously if I'm playing low A, I can play high A. So I could extend this back to scale degree 2, just an octave higher. Okay, so that would be the G major pentatonic. Sometimes it's actually centered around A, like the tune will start on A, but it's using those notes. Again, that's kind of like using a different mode of the pentatonic scale. So we're using a different note in the scale as the first note, as the one that we come to the most often. Again, with melodies and with chords, we need a starting point. Gordon was touching on this earlier, the sense of 1, 4, 5, which means just positions in the scale, the first note of the scale, the fourth note and the fifth note, and then the chord built on top of that. Really informs so much of Western tonal music, from all the way from like Baroque stuff to pop music. Okay, it's a really foundational aspect of functional harmony, and the fact that it makes it sound like we're moving from one point to another, progressing through chords. Can anyone think of any tunes in the A major pentatonic that use those notes mostly? Or G?
When the battle's oor.
That is a perfect example. Second part. Now, yes, there's a tiny little high G there. As I said, it's rare that an entire tune will be using only those 5 notes, but in that case, it's a passing note, just to smooth things out. So would sound maybe the British went. Again, as I was saying, a good melody will have places where it's jumping 2, 3 notes at a time, and then stepwise. G major pentatonic, well, I've actually got a list, so let's see if you can figure some out and match maybe 1 or 2 examples.
What about the little cascade?
The little cascade is in G major, but it's actually in E minor, because it starts on E. It starts on B, but it's centered around E. The tune's essentially centered around B, G, and E, so it's more sitting in the minor, yeah. There it changed. Went to F. So it moved to a different scale or a different chord. Again, we don't always want to be stuck in the same thing because it gets boring. So if we're using a certain chord, we can use a scale based on that chord. Or again, these are all the same thing. Okay, I want you to remember that it's a set of notes and we can build different kinds of sounds, harmonic sounds and melodic sounds. So in the case of A major and G major, we might say that a tune's in the F sharp minor pentatonic or the E minor, which just means flipping it into a bit of a different sound, okay, in a roundabout way. But I'm sure, practicing this, and I'm going to come to this later in the improvisation classes, practicing these scales will help you play music a lot better, will help you understand what's going on, and it will develop your musicality for sure, rather than the scale, which we all know and probably hate, just going. Right, that's not so dynamic and interesting. Pentatonic scales, awesome. Okay, and easy to improvise in. Easy to improvise in. There's one more. So this is if you had to move it into the minor variation. Obviously, we can't play these notes, but if you have a tune that uses those same notes, but goes to F a lot more, so it'll play F, A, and C a lot, it's going to sound like it's more minor. And if the tune is centered around E, like it goes to E a lot, and includes lots of Bs, it's going to sound more minor pentatonic. So For example, little cascade again. These are the notes of the E minor chord. And then G major, bit of a different sound. So that's in G major, starting on G a lot of the time, going to G a lot. Forget the name of that one. Okay, the last one is D major / B minor. So this is also, both of those scales we can play from the first note of the scale through all of them to the last note. Okay, this one, we can play all of the notes, but we can't go from low to high. So we started it in a different order. D major pentatonic would technically run D, E, F sharp, A, and B. Right? But because of our limitations on the chanter, we start on A. So if I play A, B, D, E, F sharp, A, I get the D major pentatonic. Okay. So those are the three main ones that we can play. Again, if you practice these scales, they really open up a whole world of understanding, not only explicitly, but also hopefully intrinsically in your musicianship. Right, so some of the tunes in the A major pentatonic, Carter the North, Fled from Flutter, they're kind of more based around being in the F minor. But again, these are essentially the same things. Again, music loves theory, loves to have two names or more for the same kind of thing, just different angles of approach. Fled from Flutter, it uses the same note, but it starts on F a lot of the time. Okay, Glasgow City Police Pipers, that actually stays, the whole tune is in that scale. There's no D or F there, high G. Kelsey's Be Real and Hector the Hero, those are just some examples. Tunes in G major, again, they don't always stay in that particular scale. They might change and introduce as a character note, a note outside of that scale. So the Old Women's Dance, Pipe Major Donald McLean of Lewis, Cutting Bracken, John Morrison of Assentower, so like Old Women's Dance. Okay, no C, no F. Donald McLean of Lewis. But you can see that goes to A a lot of the time, and you do find that. It's not because now we're in G or E that we don't center the tune around a different note. Again, because a lot of it's just to do with our limitations, right? And then I'm sure you know Cutting Bracken, John Morrison, and Royal Scottish Piper Society, big tunes. If you haven't heard this one, Royal Scottish Piper Society, it's a march that's very different to the standard competing canon. So a good one to learn, although it is quite advanced. And then a couple of examples, tunes in D major, pentatonic, Amazing Grace. Only notes in D major, pentatonic there. Merry Boys of Greenland, Shetland Reel. There, but then it changes. It goes to A for a little bit. And then back. Okay, so sometimes, phrase one is one kind of scale of chord, phrase two is a different one. Calabacan. That pretty much stays in there. Mac and Irish, and The Sound of Sleep as well. That one can literally climb through the notes there from the lowest one you can play and up. Okay, so once you know these scales again, see them in the tunes, and this will actually help your sight reading and learning of tunes because you have an expectation of what is to come. And you kind of know it's probably going to go again as opposed to like just what's next? Oh, it's complete surprise. Oh, what's next? Oh, I didn't know that was coming. We've got a little bit of a framework in which to work on. Before I move on, any questions on that? Anyone got another cool example for me? Tuning any one of those?
I remember playing scales open.
Yes.
That was a pretty good one for the pentatonic scale.
For A. It does deviate a little bit every now and then, like in the third part, and the variation of the fourth part introduces D, but again, that's like interesting now, because across the first two parts, we're just hearing that, right? And it's fine. By the time the third part comes, we need something new. The rhythms change, the shape changes. Four-parted marches, typically the third part is like a departure or something new. So yeah, it introduces a D natural there, and in the variation as listening interest, but very good example there. Lots of A major pentatonic. And really, you can have tons and tons of fun with the pentatonic scales, playing around and improvising on them. Okay, intervals on the pipes. Not really a big topic, and again, I'm borrowing things, or I'm repeating things from earlier. So anyone who missed the earlier session online, you're getting most of this anyway. So distance between any two notes, established. Smallest interval is like the two keys closest to each other on a piano. On the pipes, where we find those, C and D, C sharp and D, and F and G. You can hear that's the same. Any other time we're doing a whole step. Those are all whole tones, and I'm sure you can pick up on the bigger distances. So on the pipes, where we find our little semitones, the smallest interval. Okay. Like I said, if we want to just give a number to an interval, I just count from the low to the high one, and that's the size of the interval. We do go into more depth, exactly how many semitones makes a perfect fourth, and a major third, and a minor sixth, and all of those. Not so applicable if you want to learn that. If you understand what we call generic interval sizes, the first, the second, the third, you can go a little bit more into depth there, and it helps you understand, again, sort of why certain tunes, when they use certain intervals, creates that sound, that feeling, that character. So if I go from low A to any note above that, I just count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't have to be low A. We just tend to measure them so we can understand tonic note. Tonic note being the first note of the scale, the ground floor, the home of our sound. We want to come back to that. Otherwise, it sounds like kind of get lost, and we don't have a place to go to or depart from and come back to. And this is also how we know a piece of music is finished. It usually starts and ends on the same note, or a note from the same chord. If it doesn't, it sounds incomplete. We're kind of waiting for something. So if I count from, let's say, B to F, what would that be? On a generic interval might that be? Five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a fifth there. And the same kind of interval is between low and E. Okay, and we can measure these intervals from any two notes in the scale. And what I also do with my pupils sometimes is we map out all of the intervals. So every time I move just one note, that's a second. Every time I move two notes, that's a third. And this is a game will really develop your playing skills more melodically, and this has been one of my big focuses in my own playing as well as my teaching. Is actually melodic fingerwork is the most important, right? If you're not so great with rudiments and execution, that to me is actually secondary in terms of playing good music. Because if you can't hold the rhythm and your note changes are untidy, it's not so great. Embellishments, yes, obviously we're all again competing pipers, right? And we want it to be as good as possible. I'm not saying ignore that, but embellishments are just that. They embellish, they add on a little extra something else to a melody, and you want to be able to play the melodies as good as possible first. So we map things out, like all of the thirds on the chanter. All of the fourths. All of the fifths, all of the sixths, and the bigger the interval gets, the less we have of them until we get to the ninth, which is low G to high A. And again, if you practice those things, you're pretty much covering any possible note combination or note change that you'll ever come across in a piece of pipe music. So very useful there to practice intervals on the pipe. Okay. And again, a harmonic sounding interval, I can't do it by myself. I need one other piper. So Gordon, can you give me a low A there? And I'm going to play an E, a fifth above. Let's go down. But that's a fourth. Yeah. Okay, so those are harmonic intervals. If I'm just moving, and technically we don't need to worry about, is this is a melodic interval. Just when you're changing notes, is a melodic interval every time. So I encourage you to go home after this, when you go home tomorrow or whatever, just find the intervals, okay? Where can I count a third up or down from any one of the notes on the charter, as in 3 positions, 1, 2, 3. The note we start on, we count as 1, or 4 notes up or down, or 5 notes, and run through those. Okay. So this is what we have technically. Like low A is the tonic note. So the distance between low G and A is technically a major second, unison on A, major second A and B, A and C sharp, major third, perfect fourth from A to D, perfect fifth, A to E, a sixth or a major sixth from A to F, and then A to G is the seventh or a minor seventh. In a major scale, that could be called a major seventh. So it's a little bit taller, a bit bigger. So this interval here, the minor seventh, is really what a major part of our instrument sound, and then the octave. And if I ran from G up to low G to high A, that's a ninth, okay, which is technically an octave plus a second. So these are the specific names. Again, if you just know this is the first, the second, the third, whatever, that's good enough for now. Okay. We really only want to know major seconds and major thirds and stuff, going into more detail, and when we're playing chromatic things. So if I play a C natural, which doesn't really come through on the charter so well, it's going to be a minor third. So it's still 3, A, B, C, but it's a little bit shorter interval, it's a little lower, it's a little darker, and on the pipe it actually has a different timbre. It sounds a bit rougher, it's not as sweet sounding as a normal C, okay? So yeah, that's just a quick overview of that. How are we doing for time? Okay, tendency tones. In music, the tendency tone, so first let me actually explain concordance or consonance and dissonance in music. Essentially, we tend to think concordant sounds are pleasant. Okay, consonance is a harmonious sound of everything working together, whereas dissonance is the opposite. It's kind of jarring. The notes are clashing and fighting. So Gordon, if you could play a low G for me, and I play low A, that's dissonant. If I go to B, those two. Same low G. B. You can hear moving from a dissonant sound, so especially a second, when they're just one step apart, they grate each other, they're fighting for the same space. Whereas when they're at least 2 steps apart, a third, it starts to sound nice. A second and a seventh are kind of the same thing in a way. And so if we had to play low G and low A and high G, low A please. Dissonant. If I resolve that to high A, okay, that sounds pleasant here. This is the basis of tendency tones. Because we have a drone note, every note in our chanter carries some degree of consonance, sounds nice. Dissonance, doesn't sound so good. I don't want to use that too much more because dissonance is awesome if used correctly. It is what it is. It should not be shied away from. We tend to do that because of pipes, just conventionally. But having a spicy harmony of low A and B for a moment or two is cool if we resolve to C. And in a slow air, for example, in a pipe band setting, having these suspensions, as we call them, moving from low A and B to low A and C, really once that's resolved, it's the ear just goes, oh, thank you, it's awesome. Okay. So in melody, and this really helps when you've got a blanket drone sound, some notes sound really fine where they are, they're very stable, you can hold that note all day, low A, obviously. Right? Some notes have instability built into them against the drone. So they want to move, they want to change. You don't want to spend all day on that, right? So holding B, for example, against low A. Eventually the ear goes, please release me from this hell, okay? So a tendency tone is just that. It wants to tend up or down by a step to another note. And this again will tie into exploring our instruments and improvising. And not to diminish as well, but this is what a key rock does a lot of. It explores keys and chords and scales, and it builds tension and then resolves onto different tendency notes. Okay, so yeah, that's what I said here. Easily in, feel more. Observe and feel more. So let's check out some of the common tendencies on the pipe. Low G to low A. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't planning on it. Yeah, you're perfect for the. So you play just low A, and we resolve. Next one, B, can go wants to either go to low A or C. Or B to C. Right? Next bunch, if you could play, I think if you just stick with low A, we'll still get that.
Josh, sorry, can I just make a point? Exactly, it's ironic it's happening now. If you listen to a bell,
Yes.
you're getting a dominant ring alongside. Okay, so it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's creating another interval.
Alongside the tone,
Yeah, so we're hearing the bell's giving us a really high, much higher, and
Sorry,
it's contributing.
It's just ironic that it tuned in with your.
Actually, thank
Well
you.
set up.
No, thank you for pointing that out. Sometimes the universe likes to commune with us. Yeah. So yeah, if that was still going, we could maybe play around with moving to C. If you can just give me. So if I move from D, B likes to resolve to C because it's only a little bit higher than C sharp. Now it's not to say D and low A are discordant, but there's still a sense of resolution, cadencing. So cadences in pipe music, light music, and P-rock pretty much follow this. If you play the P-rock, how often do we go C to low A or B to low A? Resolving, it's closing off that section of music. D to E is somewhat neutral. Although it does sound nice when we get to E. F to E, And high G wants to go down. So F doesn't really tend towards high G. That adds to tension. But when I go back to F, that resolves. And then obviously high A to high G, there's a tendency, but it's also not super strong. Okay, so these are things you want to explore better on the pipes when your drones are nicely in tune. You just pay attention to that. You are going to develop your ears by doing this, okay? Because you're actively listening as opposed to just sounding something and not really paying attention to these guys to what you're doing. So this brings you into the here and now very strongly. Okay, 2 more topics. We're going to end a little bit late. We are, like I said, we're running about 15 minutes behind. Okay, so arpeggios, playing the chords in the pipe, sort of. If I had a third person, we could play chords. So an arpeggio is a broken chord. Pretty easy term to understand. We're taking notes of a chord, playing them in a melodic fashion rather than harmonically. Okay, it's a great way again to build melodic fingerwork, to build strength, to build on the pipes. You know, the bigger jumps. You're swapping hands often. It's going to develop your hands like that, and hopefully get rid of crossing noises once and for all. And then you can add sort of rudiments, or you can play them in different rhythms to spice it up. And again, this is all going to fall in line very nicely with improvisation. Either too early or too late. No, let's not fall for these divisive jokes. Okay, so I've mapped out 3 main triads that we can play here. There are more on the pipes. We can actually play what I call 7th chords. For those of you who know what 7th chords are, those are 4 different notes. So if I move through an A major chord, a D major chord, G major, and E minor, I can hear a chord progression going through here, and I'm playing each note individually in sequence, right? Right? So that's an ascending pattern. Starting in a low note, going to the high, and sort of just bouncing back and forth. I can play it the opposite direction. Could add taps, could add doublings, you can play a different rhythm. Once you know the 3 notes, I mean, so for A it's A, C, and E. D major is technically D, F, A, but we play a low A. G is G, B, D, and E minor is E, G, and B. Okay. Once you know those, you can mess around. And I'll touch on this later again in the improvisation. But you can just play any of those notes in whatever order with any kind of rhythm you're thinking of. It's going to sound cool because it's already a structure that is inherent in what you're doing. So I'll cover that again a bit later. Again, if you want this exercise, just drop me a line. I have a PBA specific email address, and it's just my name, Joshua at PBASA.co.za. Joshua at PBASA.co.za. You can mail me there, and always happy to share these kinds of things. Okay, last little topic for us now is this thing here. Okay, lots of detail can be brought into this, but let me try and summarize it for us. So this is the range. We're in the treble clef, quite a high-pitched instrument. Okay. Let's see if I can change colors. Yes. Let's go orange. Okay. This thing is cool. So this is our bass drum. That's the pitch that it plays. Okay. Our tenor drones are here, an octave higher. But the first harmonic that we hear in the bass drone is the same note as the pitch, the fundamental frequency of our tenor drones. That's how we can tune them. And as was asked earlier by Sebastian, how do I know when it's in tune? Well, it goes from wow, 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 ping. And it almost sounds like it's above you. You can hear that ping coming through. And those are the harmonics locking in and getting stronger. When they're not, the waveforms are fighting each other a little bit, and that's where we get that oscillating sound as they're crossing over each other. Okay, so, and again, I'm trying to cover things more than once. If you plug your chanter, you can practice locking those in and moving your drones and removing a third element of your chanter, which can get in the way if you're not locking your drones in. Okay, so the next harmonic of the bass drum is not the note that we play, but the fourth one, sorry, is low A. So we can actually hear it gets quieter, kind of pyramid style. They get quieter as they go higher up, but you can actually hear the note of low A in your bass drum. And I also get my students to block not their bass drum, but their tenors and tune the bass to low A. That really helps. It really helps a lot there. Okay. So then the second harmonic in the series of the tenor drones is also low A, and that's how we know. So this is why it can be difficult. We're trying to line several sets of harmonics into each other. But once you get them, and the more you do that, the easier it actually becomes. Okay. From there, the harmonics of the bass drum and the tenors start repeating the notes of A, C, and E, or A, C sharp and E, as we can see here. Right, A, C, E. It does include G, the seventh, keyboard fingering, actually more accurately, and then A again. And in the tenor drones, we can hear the pitch of E, and we can hear the pitch of high A. So A, C, E, high A are the notes that you want to actually start kind of locking into your drones, and then branch off to B, D, F, and high G after that. That's kind of the process I go through. And then yes, the pipe scale is just all about that there. All right. There are frequencies here, but these all change if we go higher or lower, and so it's all a relative thing. But if I'm sharp on the bass drum, everything else needs to sharpen in relation to that, go up a little bit. Okay, so just a little closer review. This is taken from a fantastic book, The Notation and Tuning of the Highland Bagpipe by John McLennan. Again, it just goes a little bit more into depth of like, here's the bass drum frequencies, which ones line up. The fourth one lines up to low A. So the fourth one lines up to low A. Right? The fifth one lines up to C. The sixth one lines up to E. The seventh, P-rock fingering, lines up to G, and then the eighth lines up to A. In the tenor drones, these two line up. Okay, and this is why low A is so important to get right, because all three line up there. And then the third one lines up here, and then the fourth one there. So that's why I say low A, C, E, and high A are the most stable sounding notes. So in terms of tendency tones, most notes want to move to one of those. Tension, resolution. And again, we don't need to worry about the numbers so much, but that's the, and this is, right? We've measured this and we've plotted it. So this is just what's happening naturally when we make these sounds and try and, obviously they're all developed, but these are part of the fabric of the universe, so to speak. And we try and align these things up to make something like music. When a pipe is out of tune, all of those are, none of them are lining up, and everything is fighting for each other, fighting for space between the next note, and that's when we get a badly tuned pipe. However, there is some sort of degree of, especially the notes that don't line up perfectly, there is taste that comes involved. Like maybe you prefer a slightly flatter F or a slightly flatter B or whatever. And that's what just inclination is, okay? It's got a playing around with the harmonics and making a bit more of an individually tuned pipe. And if you can do that across your pipe core, in a pipe band setting, then the whole pipe core will sort of have the individual sound. I happen to know for a fact that St. Laurent O'Toole actually tune their Fs and their Ds. I think this is when Terry Cuddy was still pipe major. Tune their F and their Ds purposefully a little bit flat. When they multiply it across the 20 pipers, that is part of the sound of St. Laurent O'Toole. Okay? And it's not to say it's unpleasant, it's just a different point within that. And A, C, and E, and high A, you can't really deviate from too much, but the others, that's what gives you a bit of a characteristic sound, and why one piper might sound a little bit different to another, even at the same relative low A of 4, 5, 5, or something like that. Okay. And all considered. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Is the PBASA IG also a natural IG?
Yeah, in terms of moving that, it's just a couple of cents higher or lower. So when you when you do a P-Rock high G, it's actually lining up with one of those harmonics in the bass drum, and that's why it's tuned that way. I'm not sure why we actually have P-Rock and live music. Maybe it's just easier, but the normal high G that we know is just a little bit sharp. It's not unpleasant, it's just a little bit of a characteristic sound, different characteristic sound. Yeah. Yes.
When it comes to like
Yeah.
how does one kind of write something like
Okay. If I just jump back to something where we've got some notation. So for those of you online, Ron just asked about is P-Rock high G a different note? No, they're kind of right next to each other. It's still considered the same note. It's very slightly different tuning. And Darren has asked a slur. How do we write a slur out? Because what are we doing? We're sliding. There's no definitive up. It's sliding in the glissando form from one note to another. And so if I do from C to B, like this is the one that made Pumpkins fancy. So fancy is that we're sliding from B to C. Right? And yes, there's a whole technique on the pipe, but basically, if I had to write this out in notation, there's a little arced line that we use. And back. Okay. Okay, cool. You just do this. So this arced line means three different things in music theory. If it's across a couple of bars, it's showing the phrase. Bars 1 and 2, phrase 1. If it's across two notes at the same pitch, it's tying the rhythms together so we don't break up the note across the bar line. And then if it's between two different notes, it's a slur. So that's indicating to me as a performer to slide between the two notes. Another common one is D to E or E to F. So you just have that little note there to say go. And slur between the two. So there's no definitive change from pitch to pitch. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yes.
I mean, you mentioned musical earlier, but when I was still learning all the basics of music theory, it's a really good tool because you can write out music yourself and you get used to it, and it tells you if your bars are, well, it doesn't tell you, but you can obviously see if your bars are not complete. You can play it back and so on. So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great application to look at. MuseScore, it's free. Apple, Windows, even Linux. And it's a great learning tool for you to play around and experiment in a very safe way. So I would recommend that. Okay, so two things you might want to check out. MuseScore I think it's on its 4th iteration, and it actually has, you can load bagpipes as an instrument, and it has all of the embellishments. So you can write out pipe music perfectly fine. Sounds a bit weird, it's not as good as like say Celtic pipes or PBASA or whatever, but you can write out pipe music where it's got everything you need. And then musictheory.net just for general beginner level sort of theory stuff. It goes halfway. Yeah.
For musical, the most recent version, is it already loaded with boys with bad play? I don't remember that plugin for it.
No, so it's already loaded. You can bring it up as an instrument, and then in the panels that you can drop down, it's not there as standard, but you can just go into deeper settings and you can say, show me bagpipe embellishments, and they'll sit there, everything from all the grace notes to the shakes to the doublings to P-rock movements. I was actually blown away when I found this out, because now when I'm setting music with the band, we can all just flip between. Makes it really, really useful. Okay. Yeah.
This is just a hard question, but so bagpipes have changed. It's like drastic. So when it first started, did they have this kind of interface? As in like in the Highlands and all that first started, because the pipes you can get So I don't know if they had a structure like this, where they just had they just stayed something. I know it's a lot flatter.
Yeah, so all of this stuff, so just to summarize Garen's question for those online, was all of the stuff there when the pipes were first developed, all those centuries ago in the Highlands? Yeah. It wasn't as explicitly known, but it was there. I mean, if you're tuning your all about like tuning the notes and everything and drones, and this was exploration on a, not as explicit, more intrinsic, more, okay, this just sounds good together. I wouldn't call it playing the fool, but a lot of music theory was stuff that was just done and then analyzed afterwards. Said, oh, we're doing this, let's try and recreate it. Conventions come around. But even the likes of P.S. McLennan, who wrote some of the best piping music in the world ever, he didn't know much theory, but he had this understanding, right? And he was doing this stuff, again, not with the direct thought, the conscious thought, that he was doing this stuff, because it's already there. It's already there. You know, the interval of third, I don't have to know what it is to be able to play it, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it was definitely there. Now that we can summarize it, this is essentially many decades worth of learning and exploration and writing in our fingertips. And that's how we progress. Yeah. Right, I think we're going to break for lunch now. The pizzas are all going to be up here, so we'll just stay in here. The power should be back on, so we're going to pump these fans. And before we break and go to our various next sessions, I would just like to get everyone who's here in person out front. We're just going to get a group shot for the attendance today. We're taking register. Okay, thank you very much.